Hey there, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Audiophiles,
a place where we get together to hang out, talk about music, video games, and all the things we love about them.
I'm your excited music business friend, Knox, joined today by one of the smartest music performers and analyzers, Mr. Malik Samor.
Hey, how's it going? In today's episode, we're talking about Chants of Sennaar. This is a new game that came out last year with a novel language learning mechanic. It opens up a whole bunch of new puzzle-solving gameplay opportunities.
Fantastic little indie game. Came out back in September of last year, 2023. Developed by a studio called Run Disc. Published by Focus Entertainment with music by composer Thomas Brunet. This is made by a two-man team with other teams helping out with programming, and the composer, of course. But this is a really small indie project from a studio in France. Developers had this long-time interest in language.
All the puzzles that you encounter, almost all of them, have to do around the central game mechanic, deciphering 4 different languages in the universe of the game.
Progression through the game is gated not by defeating a certain boss, but actually by knowledge.
Track 1, Out of the Cavern and Into the Light, is the opening track of the game. This introduces the character instruments that we're going to be listening to for the rest of the title.
And what I thought was really interesting is that thematically, these instruments are all playing their melodies one at a time, discorded from everyone else, not aware of each other's existence.
The instruments, they're taking turns to play the same melodic ideas, but they're not exactly doing it in a particularly musical way.
And it's all happening against the bed of this rolling dulcimer, which is almost kind of functioning as a drone. To me, just kind of sounds like the sunlight beaming into the window helps warm up this piece.
And it shapes all those crescendos. The rolling dulcimer is really the only way that you're going to get that like growing, shrinking.
Exactly. And it really makes it feel warm and inviting.
Earlier, you were using the word soundscape. What this opening number is doing is showing us the sounds that they want us to get used to. Because even though every little culture in the game sounds different, they all share an instrumentation. So he's getting us into
a consistent instrumentation that's related to each culture you mean.
Exactly. So those dulcimers keep coming back. The flute soloist keeps coming back.
I like the term used, character instruments.
We develop a relationship with the flautist, and we develop a relationship with the double reed instrument.
Right.
And over the course of the game, we hear them do different things. The clarinet, that's a big one. And they all have their little moment with the Te La Sol.
But they're all doing their own thing, kind of unaware of each other, almost like they're not talking to each other.
They're not communicating yet.
The bonds have been broken, and it's up to us, the player, to reunite them.
Track 2, Catch Me. Very short, saved for the opening chapters of the game.
Right, this piece, I think it's broken up into different places, and it plays when the one child character is challenging you to a game of hide and seek.
Where you're getting to know the mechanics, and you're getting to know the tone of the game, because this is whimsy.
I think it's really accomplished by these little finger symbols are so cute and associated with childhood, or you can imagine a little monkey. One other thing I took note of in this track is you introduced the idea of these character instruments in the first track. Well, that's continued here where we have these two characters having a conversation. The melody starts with the woodwinds, and then the B section of the piece is the melody is given to the strings, and they have a conversation back and forth. I think it's a great example of the music of the game setting the tone and setting up the themes that we're going to be exploring throughout the game and throughout the soundtrack. Track 3, Forgotten Bonds. Repetition legitimizes. What I mean is, you could start this track at any point in the track and it would pretty much sound the same. You wouldn't be able to tell where you are.
This is a puzzle-solving track, right?
That's right.
So I think monotony, keeping the downbeat vague, that's all a really important part of this piece.
This piece is really designed to be background and unnoticeable, not have a strong melody. It's almost functional music.
This is the one that has the Avatar melody.
What is that in solfege?
That would be Do Ti Sol Mi, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. The same as the love theme from Avatar.
That's the one. That's the one.
But what I found interesting about this, so you have that repeated phrase of the chimes in the background, and that is this ever-present, unchanging thing you have going on. And then there's other instruments that come in, and there are these long legato phrases, but they're not really quite melodies. They're just kind of, again, a soundscape.
They're ideas, but I wouldn't even go as far as to say they're melodic ideas. They're just ideas.
Right.
Yeah, it's all about tone. They're not trying to entertain you. They're just making sure you're not bored while you solve the puzzle, while instilling what the game is supposed to feel like.
It's almost like they're stimulating the left and the right brain at the same time. They're using the music to help you solve the puzzle, and when you're solving a puzzle, I think a repeated rhythmic idea can be helpful. It makes it perfect puzzle music for something that you're going to hear over and over.
Track 4.
Infiltration.
Now we're in the Warriors domain.
Warriors domain now.
But for the first time in the score, you're not supposed to feel like these are the instruments of the people.
This is purely score. Even then, it's almost like a horror soundscape. It's all semi-random. I know it's on a grid, but that time is somewhat unpredictable. I mean, every piece we've heard so far has a sense of whimsy and fun. There's not really whimsy in here. This is anxiety-inducing uneasiness.
Stealth mission and music. The Call.
You have to solve the bell puzzle, the puzzle of the bell keeper.
Oh, this is the one with that long rising melody.
This is the first time in the soundtrack we have a really grand orchestral score through composed music for music's sake. There's often multiple instruments playing the same melody at the same time. And if you continue our metaphor we've established of these instruments representing the different cultures, you are just starting to pull the cultures together. Maybe now 2 cultures are talking, but not all of them.
Garden of Plenty, track 7.
It's a long track, which makes sense because you are exploring that world for quite a while. This track captures the exoticism of the instrument choices. You have extended technique on the flute of the shrilling, this buzzing sound, which is really unique. You've got that human voice come in, but in this really strange affected tone. And then you also have that whistling sound, almost like a throat singer. Really exotic instruments that you wouldn't normally hear.
Every instrument you hear is either non-orchestral or played with an alternate technique. It was in this track that I first noticed there really aren't any drums in the game that aren't hand drums. There's a little rolling cymbal here and there, but for the most part, it's hand drums. I really picture a small group playing this. The whole thing is really intimate. I mean, how many villagers are there in the whole city?
Exactly.
Like 50? Up until this point, it's been a lot of solo instruments and small duet moments and stuff like that.
Duet moments, maybe the melody is doubled here and there.
But all of a sudden, we're starting to get cooperation between the whole ensemble.
Ensemble, exactly.
Yeah. Track 8. This track is a bit of fun.
It is a bit of fun. We're having a bit of fun at the theater.
It might be the most memorable moment of the game.
Plays when you are watching the play at the theater in the Bard's level.
It's only like 90 seconds long, but it is sparking fast. We listened to a little bit of the composer's other work. Listening to a bit of fun was probably his most out of comfort zone.
It does sound different from everything else in the soundtrack.
It totally sums up the attitude of the bards.
Right, they're so playful and energetic.
But it's also silly and undignified.
Silly. Exactly, silly. That's the perfect word for it. This is one of the pieces that I could argue could be considered to be one of the more diegetic pieces, meaning this is something that you could imagine is actually soundtracking the play that's happening in this world, as in the characters in the game world are hearing this same song that you are.
Track 10, Cogs of Science.
The Alchemists.
We are in the rising action part of the game because we've completed 3 levels.
This is the last big story beat before the climax.
And it's the last world that you're in that's like the other ones. There's 4 main worlds and then a 5th one that's different.
The music in this section keeps up that tone that we've established so far in the soundtrack of lighthearted whimsy and mystery. All of the fast-paced, upbeat strings in here are really meant to emulate pensive contemplation. Feel like think, which is, of course, what's a value that's very important to the alchemists.
I took away one melody from this game that I remembered most, and it was the ya-da-da-da-dum, because it came up so much, and also because I was so darn stuck on the alchemist level that I heard it like 1,000 times.
The melody that you're mentioning, I think, is played by woodwinds. And in fact, I think the woodwinds is one of the most heavily featured instruments on this piece. And when we were talking about earlier the idea of the character instruments, I think this piece does a long way to associate the woodwinds with the alchemists.
Track 12, In the Machine. This is travel music. You're traveling from one place to another, and it's very clearly not puzzle music because it's not very pleasant to listen to and you don't want to be there very long, it really pushes you, the player, to not linger here. There's no collectibles here. There's no NPCs. You want to get from point A to point B, and the music is pushing you there.
There's just these two melodies, and it's almost tomb-like. It's almost like exploring the Pharaoh's tomb, which is what you're doing. You're exploring the tomb of this ancient civilization. I also want to call out here that this is one of the first moments in the soundtrack I noticed digital sounds. You have these little digital glitches happening in the background. It's interesting that the first time you hear an electronic instrument of any kind, it's in fact glitches, and it adds to that mystery and what's going on here.
Track 14, I get to talk about this one because I'm the one who got the bad ending.
That's when this plays, right?
That's when this plays. So if you fail and you go to the top of the Tower of Babel, you don't complete all of the connections from those puzzles around the tower, spoiler alert, you get a sad ending where you end up not completing your mission. And I guess you don't try again. You just kind of sit there in sadness in the rain and the credits roll. And this really pretty song plays. I definitely recommend you go listen to it.
The opposite of the sad ending with simple music is really complex, big orchestral with the good ending. Track 15, Bonds Reforged. Here you have a piece that is again different from the rest of the soundtrack because it is a big orchestral swelling piece that has different instruments than the rest of the soundtrack that we've heard so far. Talking about the structure of this piece overall, the introduction has kind of the same sonic world that we've been in. It has strings and woodwinds and hand percussion all playing together. Then it's building into this big moment of final triumph. And when you hit triumph, you hear a human voice.
Like a Celine Dion hit in Senar language.
Senar, Celine Dion. The human voice representing the idea of being able to talk to each other again. I don't know, is that too much of a stretch?
Even when there are voices in the rest of it, it's either pure neutral vowel or affected throat singing. So suddenly now there's lyrics, there's text. It's not text that's familiar to us, but it's text. I wouldn't think it's a stretch at all to say that.
I think it's really interesting that the story of this piece echoes the story of the entire game. We've heard the human voice before a few points, but we haven't heard a piano, or if we have, it's been very sparse through the entire soundtrack so far. Introducing instruments that weren't in the rest of the soundtrack brings us back to the real world and kind of reminds us that we are playing a game and that this is the conclusion of it, because now we have a different feeling than we've had the entire game.
I like that you brought that up. The composer really does take us out of the game by saying, the game is over, let me sing you a song.
And then there's the third section of the piece. It starts to wind down. Instruments fall out and it gets more simple, and you have a denouement of the music and denouement of the entire story as it leads you into a resolution. So Chants of Sennaar uses score to create this really charming tone that feels inviting, welcoming, but also foreign and exotic. The music of each world kind of interacts.
There are shared melodies from each little culture that you meet. In each level, you have distinct musical styles. You have to have distinct musical styles because they're trying to demonstrate to you that the cultures, that they're not connected. They're loosely connected.
Right.
I mean, we're mostly focusing on audio, but the color scheme changes. The people behave differently.
Right. Every culture definitely treats you differently. I mean, the bards tend to be a little
snobby. The warriors will just kill you.
This culture has 30 words in their language, and they had to devote one of them to idiot. Feels unnecessary. Whereas the Alchemists, of their 30 words, half of those are just numbers. The music that you hear when you're hanging out with the devotees and the warriors and the bards and the alchemists, in each world, the music has a different feel. It has different instrumentation. It has different melodic qualities, and it creates a different emotional attachment with each one of those cultures.
The people have a different attitude in each culture, and the music shares their attitude. It keeps you excited to get to the next level,
which is essential for a puzzle game. We're still getting an entirely new genre of games, and this is a knowledge-based game. The progression gate of this game is knowledge. There's virtually no replay value because once you learn it, you now know it, and you can't unlearn it. But it makes you feel so smart when you're going through. This has been the Audiophiles Podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning in.
If you're just checking this out for the first time, it's a great time to hit subscribe and help grow the network.
Really helps us out. And until next time, I'm Malik.
I'm Knox.
And we are the Audiophiles. Play
with sound.